My name is Tori, and today I am going to be reviewing Warrior's Weapons by Mark Buehr, I believe. So this is a book written in 1963 about all different weapons that were used before the invention of gunpowder. This book focuses primarily on Europe, but there are mentions of other cultures, and there's a whole little chapter on different weapons from other cultures that aren't European. So it starts with a little bit of the very basic inventions. There's a chapter each on the Stone Age, the Bronze Age, and the Iron Age. And then from that point on, each chapter talks about a different kind of weapon. So it will talk about swords and polearms and shields and armor and like siege engines and all kinds of different things. So this book mostly just kind of describes, it gives a brief little overview of each kind of weapon it's talking about. It'll talk about different variations and when they were used. Occasionally, like just once or twice, it'll describe a battle so you can kind of see how all the things came together and how they were used. The book has illustrations by the author. So you can see there's like diagrams of castles and like little pictures of all different kinds of weapons and stuff. So that makes it really easy to understand what the author is talking about. So because this book is from the 60s, some of the information might be a little outdated. Most of it is historical, which means that all the stuff in here is still pretty accurate, I'm guessing. The only thing I would be a little cautious about is that since we've had new archaeological discoveries in the last 50 years, they might have changed the time periods on when some of these things were used, or they might have discovered some different weapons in different places since this was written. But since this is just meant as kind of a very basic overview, I think it's still as accurate as it needs to be. So I had a lot of fun reading this book. I liked learning about the section on polearms. I've seen this kind of thing several places before, and now I know that it is called a halberd. And so in different fantasy books I've read, they talk about the different kinds of weapons they're using, and now I know a lot more about what those different names mean. Okay, so the most interesting weapon I read about in here that I'd never heard of before was the multiple arrow siege catapult. So it's this device for firing a bunch of arrows. So it says that it looked like an upright door braced to a base. As many as 10 arrows pointed at the target were inserted in holes in the door, with their necks protruding. A row of springy timbers, whose ends were bolted to the base, was then bent back by a tackle. When the operator pulled the trigger, these timbers sprang forward, struck the nocks of the arrows, and drove them out of the holes and simultaneously into flight. So I thought that was a very interesting little thing that I'd never seen before. One of the reasons that I like learning about ancient weapons so much is that people were so creative before they had all these like big destructive things we have, before they had gunpowder and atomic bombs and all that. They were very creative with just hunks of wood and metal, and they were able to do all these really cool things that were quite spectacular feats of engineering. So I thought that was really interesting to hear about. I loved the section on like armor and chainmail and helmets. And then at the very back, it has a little dictionary of all different kinds of weapon names. So this is a library book, but if I owned it, it would be really nice to be able to just, every time you're reading a fantasy novel or historical novel or whatever, and you come across a name of a weapon you don't know, just scroll through here and see what they're talking about. So I thought this was a very interesting book. It was a great little overview of just like an introduction to different kinds of weapons from before gunpowder was invented. So it stops before gunpowder was commonly used and replaced non-gunpowdery weapons. So it stops kind of with the Renaissance, I'd say. And I had a lot of fun reading this and learning about the history of weapons.